Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I would like to welcome today's special transatlantic panel. With me is Per Brogard Bergring from Denmark. He helps leaders focus on digital and organizational change and transformation management while building sustainable environments through trust, respect, inclusion, and diversity. Pascal Durian from Ireland is CEO of Migraine Ireland, a registered charity dedicated to empowering migraineurs by providing innovative services through education, information, and outreach programs. And Tony McClellan from London is founder and director of First Life Group. She is a critical friend and business mentor in social justice, mobility, and impact, leading sustainable change through DEIB and compassion. Thank you all for being with me today.
Thank you,
Here is our scenario. Air travel has gotten more challenging, and stories of lost luggage abound. But this one really stands out as an example of incompetence crossing the ethical line. On July 17th, Sandra Shuster and her 15-year-old daughter Ruby boarded a United Airlines flight in Baltimore. They arrived in Denver to discover that Ruby's lacrosse kit had not arrived with them. After twice being told by United representatives the kit would arrive the next day, Ms. Shuster was told it was still in Baltimore, except it wasn't. The kit carried an Apple AirTag, which showed it at baggage reclaim in Chicago's O'Hare Airport. Despite repeated calls, Ms. Shuster was told that they couldn't find the lost bag, that they weren't allowed to call Chicago, and that she had the wrong tracking number, which was printed on a sticker attached to her boarding pass. It was later discovered that the check-in agent had attached the wrong tag. Over the next several days, representatives told her the AirTag must have been lost. The bag must have been stolen. They couldn't be certain it was in Chicago, and that Ms. Shuster should file a claim for lost luggage. Meanwhile, Ruby had to borrow a kit for one game and had tryouts approaching the next week. In the end, Sandra Shuster bought a ticket to Chicago to retrieve the bag herself. She informed United of her plans, and they told her to let them handle it. She took the flight anyway, sending a message to the O'Hare baggage office, which had the bag waiting for her when she arrived. Despite repeated assurances from multiple United staff that they had been searching for her bag and had contacted Chicago, the O'Hare office had never heard from them at all. No one is perfect, and people make mistakes. But no one at United ever apologized to Sandra Shuster. And only after CNN contacted the airline did she get her miles refunded. She still lost a day of work and suffered hours of aggravation. This kind of customer mistreatment is highly unethical. How could representatives have acted to resolve the issue effectively? What can business leaders do to create a culture in which employees are motivated to solve problems themselves when systems fail? And why have so few businesses actually taken steps to promote a healthier company culture? The floor is open.
Oh my. That's a busy one. I think there's a lot of stuff there. Process, transactional approach to work. Cannot be harsh doing my job or going beyond. Lack of customer service culture, you name it, the whole 9 yards. But to me, it's really can't talk systems and people and culture. It really starts with the individual. That's the first point of failure, the first point of success. It's really, if everybody is showing up to do a job, you do it really, really well. And it seems that whoever she has been spoken to was not necessarily showing up on the day. And she was moved from one end to another with no intent. It was just like, it was a hot potato move from one hand of the company to the other. Yeah, you may say it's a first world problem, it's just a lacrosse, but if you do apply that in everything you do, the company is in trouble.
We have a comment from Kimberly, who says pretty much what you're suggesting, Pascal, that actually listen to the customer. What I find infuriating about this story is that it could have been so easily remedied. You're right, it's a first world problem. It doesn't rise to the level of Ukraine or many other issues that are facing us. But these things just don't have to happen.
But
what are some other thoughts?
I think that there's three different aspects to this, and one is the organization as a whole, and the other is the employee, and the other is the passenger. So just picking up on what Pascal was kind of started us going with, is that communication. And you'll find that with these larger organizations, the communication chains can get broken, the systems that they communicate, 1 minute you're speaking to one person, and then an hour later you're speaking to someone different, and the flow is unlikely to happen. So it's about taking really good notes. You're unlikely to speak to the same person twice, so that's kind of really my contribution, just on the back of what Pascal has said in relation to communication, really.
I think on top of that, and also what you said, Jonathan, is it a difficult issue? Maybe it's not. Maybe the behavior, as you mentioned, also is what makes it difficult, or actually you say the complexity is created by the agents that are actually involved, right? And as I read, and when you tell the scenario, there are several instances of if not direct lying, then let's say close to, right? So some fundamental ethical, commitments that we actually have towards each other, or the ethical demand is kind of sidetracked, if you will. So as long as you have a certain distance between you, the phone or the tablet, right, you can also distance what you are committed to or obliged to do as in this case, a professional. But before that, the persons are just humans like the rest of us, right? It becomes a little bit, where does this behavior come from, right?
Yeah, one of the things that jumps out at me is that she being told that the representatives were not allowed to call Chicago. Now, I'm sure there must have been some kind of rationale for putting a rule like that in place. But what ends up happening is that the representatives are actually prevented from taking initiative to solve the problem. And they end up with the attitude, well, I don't want to risk my job by doing something I'm not allowed to do. Part of it is a lack of trusting the employee to be able to act outside the lines, and trust of the employer to not hold the employee responsible for trying to help the customer.
So there's a different perspective. Sorry, Pascal. Shall I go ahead?
Your Highness.
So the perspective I'm going to throw in there is about who is ultimately accountable, because that's where it starts, isn't it? And just for good measure, and on the back of what Per has contributed, I'm just going to throw it in there because, we're all humans and we all make mistakes, but it's what we do next that counts as well. And what is it here? Is it incompetence that you've referred to, Jonathan, or is it negligence, or is it human error? So that's really where I'm kind of going with this: incompetence, human error, or negligence. So, and it's going to be difficult for the organization because there's different measures that they will take depending. And so based on what you've just said, Jonathan, about how that person might take an action and how others might respond will depend on what that culture is as well. So there's something in there about those three areas for me.
Well, let me ask you, Tony, what's the difference between incompetence and negligence? Is there not a tremendous amount of overlap there?
Well, because incompetence is that you haven't got, in my view, you haven't got the ability to do your job properly. Negligence may be that you didn't, tick a necessary due diligence box. before you undertook that. So I think one is more skills based. Do you have the skills? The other is more, yes, you may have the skills, but you weren't paying attention, kind of thing, So that's how I would simply put it. But I'm sure my colleagues Pascal and Per might have a different perspective on that.
No, not quite, actually. I think the 3 areas you were mentioning, I tend to see them as consequences of, you were talking about trust, you understand, and I trust and empowerment, and then the process. I think if through the process, the people are not empowered and trusted to go beyond, there's a fundamental issues in terms of how you show up at work, is it rewarding? Why are you here? And also in terms of process, there's always an exception, which is part of the process. Otherwise, that's just a very rigid process. It seems that the process is so rigid that it doesn't allow for any deviation. So therefore, you cannot really find a solution. It seems that these airlines see, which is really funny for an airline, see the world as a very static environment where actually things move very swiftly from A to B and there's nothing happen ever. I don't know any process, even in 60 mile terms or whatever, whereby there's not an exception to the process built in it. It's part of the process. But if you don't empower and trust your employees culturally to do that, I think commercially you're in trouble. You're gonna have a problem, and that's fine because it's just a lacrosse stick. But if you apply that to any other industry, it's a recipe for disaster.
Well, that is sort of the whole underpinnings of capitalism, is that the market will account for a lack of service, but we don't always see it working out that way, practically speaking. Pierre, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking also on this thing about accountability and responsibility, right? The accountability is most often after the fact, and we would find normally somebody to be accountable, right? And we could call it a multi-agent system, right? There are more agents in here that is actually maybe even amplifying the poor effect or non-effect or negative effect, if you will. So I'm thinking if the reverse part of this, or if we look at the personal responsibility, and I agree with, if you have a culture where you do not trust your employees, they will not take the personal responsibility, I think, perhaps neither professionally or privately, right? And then you have, well, I think you guys should call it apathetic employees, right? Or I don't know what else to call it here. So I'm thinking how to backtrack, because there's not one accountable person, at least in the scenario for me. And maybe it could actually be, I'm quite sure it will be used in the company as a learning experience, so to speak, right? we need to do something. It's not very customer oriented.
Yeah, and I think that kind of takes me back to the topic of negligence versus incompetence, that it's sort of a systemic negligence that creates a situation in which employees don't have I don't remember exactly how you phrased it, Tony, the ability or the skills to do their jobs. The system isn't letting them, or isn't training them, or isn't preparing them. So the negligence is towards the top, which allows the incompetence on the front lines. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think it does, because it's about, there feels a little bit more about micromanagement as well in here. If someone's saying, well, they weren't allowed to do something, if their instinct is saying it's the right thing to do, or the natural flow of things to do, and they're not allowed. I remember I used to have a senior manager that was head of an organization, and I was a deputy, and they made decisions about absolutely everything. And then one day, she wasn't there to make this decision. And we all know how that story ended. So I'm not going to say anything more. So Per's laughing, Pascal is there. So, you know, this is it. When you kind of take that control all the time, you know, something's gonna give at some point.
Yeah, it seems, you know, as Pierre was mentioning, I think it seems to be a unfortunate series of events or sequence of events, a bit of a comedy of errors as well. You know, I was thinking Faulty Towers, which obviously Tony may be very familiar with, probably not so much you guys, but it's really about an hotel which cannot really run because it's a mix of incompetence, lack of processes, and in the end, not necessarily knowing why they were in the business in the first place. And I think it seems that's probably what actually this company has forgotten about. It's really to serve the customer. And when something hit the fan, you need to do something. And funnily enough, you reminded me, Tony, about a company I worked for. We had similar processes. But, you know, it's about accountability and personal perseverance as well, and doing stuff outside the box. I used to pick up the phone and use the change of influence to get stuff started. Again, you know, it's showing up and trying to do your best and and if it doesn't work, you try to be a bit creative. Fine if culturally the company does not necessarily encourage you, but it's pretty pathetic at individual level if you do subscribe to actually this state of affairs. And to me, that's a sad state of affairs, especially for an airline company. You know, that's not good from a repeat business standpoint. I'm pretty sure those two will probably fly with another airline, independently of how many air miles and smiles they're going to get. It could be far more disagreeable if it was a wheelchair or if it was something else. And I'm pretty sure they apply the same principle, and it would have far more dramatic outcome for the people impacted. So I think, you know, whoever is the chief culture officer in this company needs to take a really hard look at their Monday management meeting. I think they need to have a discussion about what is working and what is not working. Because personally, if I knew who is this company, I would certainly not fly with.
Yeah, you know, you just put me in mind, Pierre, of you know, mentioning popular culture. This wonderful movie from a number of years ago called 9 to 5, where the junior executives kidnap the office manager, and while they have him kidnapped, they transform this office from a toxic place to this humming, you know, highly efficient environment. Sometimes that seems to be you know, the best solution. I mean, one of the messages that I like to communicate is the good ethics of good business, and that when we do things the way we should, we attract customers. We serve our customers; they want to come back again, and we don't allow situations like this to come about at all. Pierre, you look like you have something on your mind.
No, I'm thinking back on also the incompetence and negligence. If you kind of constrain your employees to that level that they cannot actually do something and they're not allowed to even, then of course let's call it a structural challenge, right? It's in the system. That's what I mean. But I'm thinking also what you say for bringing up this nice movie, because it is actually fairly fun that I don't know, the universal applicability of the golden rule, if you will, right? Whether you phrase it positively or negatively, do unto others what you can have them do unto you, or you can also phrase it a little bit more negative, right? I think these are simple human basic foundational topics, and if that is for any professional reasons sidetracked, then you are dehumanizing the organization, right? You are making people incapable of judging and making their own decisions.
There's a comment here from Aya. She asks about companies that offer guarantees, and I think that implicit in that, you know, a guarantee doesn't mean that mistakes can't happen, errors can't happen, but the whole idea of accountability. You know, I think we're used to politicians after some sort of a scandal, they say, I take responsibility. Well, what does that mean? What are the consequences? You say you're responsible, which means, it's your, our president long ago, Harry Truman, had a sign on his desk that said, the buck stops here. You keep passing the buck. Eventually, it's got to end up somewhere. But to be accountable means that it's up to me to make things right. And if I don't have a way to do that, then I'm not really taking accountability, am I? Tony?
And I think the first step in terms of the accountability is somebody coming forwards and saying, we are very sorry about the experience, to putting something in place to make it up to the customer if they can, and acknowledging the fact that we have some work to do internally, and we will do that. And we will let you know how it goes, because it is about credibility and reputation and all of those things. And I think trust comes with, that credibility, doesn't it? And as leaders, sometimes you think, well, actually, we're never wrong. Well, actually, we're allowed to be wrong. We're humans. Yeah. But like I started off saying, we're all humans. We make mistakes. But it's what you do next that counts. What is your next move? That's really where it lies for me.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. I think nobody took the ownership at any point in the process. And I'm going to deliver the bigger spoon. It was really pass the parcels from one to another. The lack of ownership is actually disturbing, on any steps in the process. And if you just have to go to CNN to get stuff done, that's not good. That should be the last resort. And actually, yeah, culturally, I think they have a big problem. Process aside, process can be fixed, and it's pretty easy. But culturally, I think they probably have a way deeper problem. That company seems to have forgotten why they're in business for.
Well, let's try to follow up that line a bit. When we see this type of cultural failure, I think it's often safe to say, maybe always safe to say, that it's a top-down problem, because culture starts at the top. So what is the mindset of leaders that allow a culture to develop in this way, that wait for the next crisis and then run to try and do damage control, especially when these things seem to happen again and again and again? What's the lack of vision? How do we get inside the head of a leader who is not actively taking a position or implementing initiatives to create a more efficient, healthier culture?
That's where the word incompetence comes in. I'll throw that one in there for good measure for Per and Pascal.
Oh no, yeah, no, I think you're right. And it's some leaders are way too transactional in their approach, and that's the problem. Even though it's a transactions, moving people and moving parcels and all these type of things, that's highly transactional. However, from a systemic standpoint, I think you need to build a value prop which is pretty attractive to customers and people to work for. Actually, your employees should be your first customers. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's how it tends to function. But you need to be very, I suppose, customer-centric in this type of business. So failing to do so, you end up with this type of situation. I would say, incompetence as well, but you need to manage as opposed to damage. I think that's pretty important. And it's leadership. There's a lot of thought leader pretty much everywhere, around every corner on LinkedIn. There's self-confidence, who have been, I suppose, being giving themselves some titles or these type of things. But I think thought leadership is not necessarily an exec trait. It starts at every level, and it goes to customer service desk or whatever. It'll just go back around ownership. Competence can be acquired at that level. In leadership, rarely. But or especially it's too late for many of them. But I think you're right. I think this incompetence and a lack of diligence is actually infuriating.
Maybe just a brief comment on this, that this micromanagement or control freak, as we also call it, right? It is transactional, right? It's about processes that are written down that you can actually measure. Have you done this and that? So you can actually click the clock, right, to measure productivity, efficiency, effectiveness, and all of these nice things. Customer service is about something completely different, right? Because the customer, in most cases, still, even though we have artificial intelligence, are humans. And anything to do with humans, that would be relational, right? Not transactional. What you say, neglecting the responsibility to treat the other, in this case, person, right, as a human, and not just a transaction, is it's definitely not doing a good thing for the customer service, right? And it's not helping the organization. I think au contraire, it's hurting it. And maybe just a brief comment, if you will, also on the CNN topic. It is it's another global issue we have, right? That your complaints will not be heard unless you get it into the press. So something systemic on a much larger scale is probably also at play here.
Well, that's the accountability, isn't it? I have to go to the media to get accountability. Marcia says in a comment that accountability's gone out the window. And maybe it's even worse than that. I'm reminded of a story in the news a while back about a bank. I don't know, it was a bank teller, I think. She got a call from a customer, an elderly person who was having difficulty managing their account. And she, on her lunch break, went to the home of this person to help solve the problem. And she was fired by her manager. Fortunately, that story got some play and she was immediately rehired by a different bank. But, again, it's so hard to get inside the head of people who are making these types of decisions. You mentioned, humans versus robots, Pierre. You've got too many humans acting like robots. And then the robots do a much better job of being robots than humans do.
Yes.
Well,
Constraint. I agree. But it is, I know it's a little bit on the side here, but my wife works in customer service, right? And the key measure is the number of mails you can answer in a day, right? Yeah. Happy customer, easy mail, you can answer a lot. Unhappy customer, not so easy mail, you cannot answer that many. So the number of answered mails is, maybe at best arbitrary, right? It's just, come on, be serious about it. And the same thing is, in this case, I think it's about getting things done in a transactional way instead of relating to the complaining customer. And that is actually a little bit scary, I would say. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. Actually, it's funny enough, just to go back on the ethical aspect of this story. Normally, I don't particularly like how those people were treated, but equally, I absolutely despise the name and shame approach with the CNN component of the story as well. It's not great either. I don't find it overly ethical either, even as a last resort. So it's highly polarized on both ends of the spectrum. And it's not great. There's not a happy end to this story in any shape or form per se. And that may be the way we are, post-COVID and so on, when I thought we would rebuilding a bit more the human relationship in our business interactions, but doesn't seem to be overly the case. And to your point, I've come across some bots who are far more personable than some humans, which is actually scary and not very ethical either.
Yeah, that's really an interesting point, Pierre, Pascal, that, when the unethical behavior of others pushes us to responses that we'd be better off not acting in that way. It leads to an ethical breakdown all through society.
See, the thing about it is that we're trying to, let humanity flow, but it's constrained by all these rules. That's really what it is. We need to just be I just say that humanity is easy, but it's humans that make it complicated. Because actually, let's just flow. Let's just, have some empathy, have some feeling, have some compassion. And, the other thing I wanted to pick up as well is that it's about when people come into an organization, do they understand what they're accountable for? Do they understand what they're responsible for? Do they understand that they're there to serve, for an example, an organization like this? So for me, I move a little bit away from customer service, but more to customer experience, because if you kind of frame it in that way, especially on an induction coming in, for me, it's about the experience. How do I feel? Is it a positive experience? And that's different to customer service as such, because the experience feels a little bit like extras.
Ooh.
You're going over and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this all the time. I'm, on the wrong edge of the age curve for dealing with technology, and I just recently I was on a site. I had to make a change to something I was uploading. The instructions say, click on this button, and the button's not there. And there's nowhere to go. It took me 2 days to get someone to get back to me with a solution. And it just, again, like as you said, Pascal, that's first world problems. There are lots worse things going on in the world and in my life, but this just seems so unnecessary. And sometimes it's the little things that can really cause us to sort of crack, at least in the moment. There's a comment from Mark here. He writes that leaders need to communicate the vision, hire managers to operationalize it, and let those managers empower people to do what needs to be done to achieve the vision. It reminds me that Simon Sinek was talking to a CEO who says, my biggest concern is the customer. And Simon Sinek said, you haven't seen a customer in 20 years. Right? Your concern is the people who are responsible for the people who are responsible for the customer. And that's what culture is all about, no?
Absolutely. And actually, I came across somebody who was interviewed. Was how do you manage a company of 10,000 people? He said, I don't manage 10,000 people. I manage my directs, and then they manage, and it's up to me to set the tone and do the right things and hire the right guys and so on, and so forth, and that the guys have to do the same. And that's how you build a system whereby people are empowered, rightly onboarded as well. And they know their remit, and they know when they can go beyond their remit, and they're allowed to go beyond their remit with reasons, obviously. Otherwise, it's anarchy on steroids. But exceptions to process is part of the process. Failing to do that or understand that it's not going to work in anything, whether it's technology, potatoes, healthcare, or whatever. So imagine in health, if we were doing those things, if it's not A, B, C, and it's very binary, you will end up killing people. That's a far more serious outcome. So, yeah, it's not because it could be a bigger problem that it's not a problem either. But yeah, I think whoever is in charge has to do it, and depends. No matter how big is your ecosystem, it's the same principle.
Because I think that there's so much about leaders thinking that leadership is about power and control and getting caught up with this ego piece. But my take on this is about you don't become more powerful by holding on to your power. You become more powerful by using it to empower others. And so the more you give away, the more comes back to you. And, so there's something really fundamental in this organization that is around it, people feeling empowered to use their initiative. And that's really key, isn't it? It feels as if there's some stumbling block somewhere. There's a block somewhere.
Yeah, it seems to be a bottom-up or top-down. I've led large organizations. I'm leading a smaller one, but in any case, I've always been the weakest link. I was surrounded by people who knew how to do the things. That's why they were hired. Because if I end up knowing better, probably I should do their job and they should do mine, which is probably maybe actually a good thing to do. But in my current setup, the people who are around me know what they're doing. I know a bit of everything. I have a different role, but I have zero problem telling I'm the least knowledgeable about a lot of things about neurology. I'm not a clinician. I'm not an HCP, and that's okay. And I learn every day, and you learn from both. They learn maybe sometimes from me, but I learn way more on a daily basis from them. That's how you tend to function. So there's a whole this approach which is completely outdated as far as I'm concerned, from a leader and people still functioning with their titles and blah, 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 and how big is their cars. Those days are gone. And if they're not gone, they are numbered. And the business we're operating like that, their days are numbered too.
That's, you remind me, Pascal, I've heard it said that the best CEO does nothing. Because the job is to get all the right people in the right places and make sure that they have what they need to do their jobs. But the micromanaging is ridiculous. It's so counterproductive on every level. You said something, Tony, that got me thinking. You said that giving away power makes you more powerful. And that's a really intriguing idea. The sages say that the person who acts is not as great as the person who enables someone else to act. But I never really thought about applying it in a business context. So that's really intriguing to me.
And it actually works. This is the thing. It does work because, one person cannot hold all of the power. And the more you give it away, the more things happen, and as they rise, you rise, so that's the thing, it works. So that's what's key.
And Marcia has a comment to your earlier remark, Tony, that she says humanity is easy. It's humans who make it complicated. And I'm reminded of the old Peanuts comic strip where Linus says, "I love humanity. It's people I can't stand." And perhaps we can all think of that or sympathize with that at times. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I think what we see also with the technology and the technology development with the digital is we see networked communities, right? It's something that is knitted. It comes together by connection, by nodes. And this thing about, as you mentioned, Tony, with the power is kind of a distributed responsibility, right? And there are ideas around with distributed morality, even also saying is there's backtracking on the responsibility, and a slightly hyped concept of distributed leadership. I haven't really looked into it yet, but it's kind of the weakest link in the chain, right? Thinking. So somehow it needs to come together, and it is not about that one person that didn't do the customer service right. It's an organizational issue, and the culture, as you mentioned, it comes from a different place, and it's not going to be fixed by fixing one agent. That's a really interesting case.
Yeah, and when we focus, when we wait for mistakes to happen, which is often because we're too focused on, and the term you use, Pascal, transactional, I think is really really instructive. Let's look in the smallest, closest focus we can on the cost benefit of every individual action, as opposed to looking at the broad picture. If we spend all our time putting out fires, we're not doing our jobs nearly as well as we could be. And we're investing a lot more in solving problems than in preventing them from happening. And that should be a fundamental mindset of leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're actually, bear with me 2 minutes. I was thinking about this story in a different way as well. We live in a very highly automated world at the moment, and RFID tags and all these type of things. And there's almost something poetic about the fact that it's actually a human error. So there's maybe an opportunity for us to reflect that maybe we should not abdicate in front of technology either. And this blind trust around technology to take care of the process is also a failure of how we do things. So we're talking about bots earlier, but there's a bit of abdication of ourselves as humans towards technology. I'm failing with technology a bit like yourself, Jonathan. I had to go to the bank and talk to real people to get some stuff sorted on my phone because I couldn't deal with 3 screens. But deep down, we are people and we're dealing with people. So that's maybe something we should not forget. And it's all great that we have a lot of automations and stuff that I didn't know could be possible. And there will be more. But at the end, people are the catalyst. They are the consumers. They're also the triggers, but they also deliver. Maybe the delivery is taking a different shape or form than 50 years ago, but it's still the same. So how we take care of problems is still, we should have a human approach. And it's probably not really as different as how my grandfather wanted to be treated. He just wanted to be treated as a human when there was a problem at the local grocery shop. So I think, there was almost something poetic about the fact that we had all these systems, somebody have made a mistakes, and it became a human story. So that's the other side. That's probably the creative mind in me, which start to think about those things that way.
Yeah, I think we could probably have a whole other episode on following that line, that we want technology to serve us, right? We want the technology to serve us and not become servants of technology by abdicating our responsibility to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
That was a bit naughty of you, Pascal, to throw that one in right as we're coming to the close, because you've got my mind opened up now. And
but I'm slow, Tony, so it took me a while to get there.
No, well, I tell you what, you really got there with that one. And when you were talking, it made me think about AI plus EI and HI, which is artificial intelligence, the emotional intelligence, the human intelligence, and the combination of the three, and how important that is. So thank you for that contribution, Pascal. I thought that was it was brilliant. Did you want me to conclude now, Jonathan?
You want to wrap up, Tony? Sure.
My piece.
Give the last word.
Yeah, it was just kind of accountability is what jumps out here, because even though they went to CNN, I don't think there was any accountability. All it was just highlighted, wasn't it? So that apology, as far as I understand, still hasn't come. Think about customer experience rather than customer service. Humanity is easy, humans make it complicated. Let's just simplify all of it. And as Pascal was saying, let's make it less transactional. And just think about, we are all humans, we make mistakes, but what is your next move? Because it's what you do next that counts. Come forward, admit it, be open and transparent, because I know that there are some organizations that are taking, punitive measures for people are losing their jobs, etc., based on whether it's human error or negligence or incompetence, because they can't tell the difference between the three. So thank you very much for having me, Jonathan. It's been a really great conversation with Per and Pascal.
Well, thank all of you, and thank you for that. Nice wrapping things up for us, Tony. But wonderful conversation. Thank you, Per Brogard, Per Green, Pascal Darien, and Tony McClelland. Really, really appreciate you coming together. And for those of you who are watching or listening, if you have a topic you'd like us to take up, please go to ethicsninja.com, use the contact information. If it's something compelling, we'll definitely use it for a future episode. And until next time, I always encourage you and all of us to continue to grapple with the gray.